You've basically been on the inside of almost every major business model innovation and venture-backed innovation in accounting technology in the past decade.
My vision of technology and AI is it's going to allow us to be more human than ever. I have spoken to somebody who was telling me a story of someone who's running $1 million bookkeeping firm and fired all of his staff already.
Does this scare you or get you excited?
I happen to be very good at accounting. I hate doing accounting. So my LinkedIn bio has read for probably 5 to 10 years. The computers are coming and I can't wait. Like I am thrilled.
Welcome to Tech Finance. I'm your host, Sasha Orloff, repeat founder and current CEO of Puzzle, and self-professed finance nerd. On this show, we dive into the pulse of B2B fintech, from newly funded startups transforming the office of the CFO to major industry shifts, deals, and partnerships that are reshaping how we think about finance. You'll hear the most important developments, essential analysis, and of course, AI innovations. This show is brought to you by Puzzle and the Turpentine Podcast Network. Let's dive in.
All right, here we are. Another fascinating episode of Tech Finance. Today we have a very exciting guest. I also consider a friend, Luke Frye. And the reason I'm having him on is he's had arguably one of the most interesting careers in accounting and technology. He's been a CPA with his own firm. He was the first accountant at Bench. He was inside of Pilot.com, Rivet Tax, Puzzle, here building core general ledger accounting software. He now runs his own consulting practice, helping accounting firms make more money. He's basically been on the inside of almost every major business model innovation and venture-backed innovation in accounting technology in the past decade. So I'm really excited for this. Luke, thanks for coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it, Sasha. I know that we've had the pleasure of getting to do some good work together and share a lot of thoughts. So I appreciate the opportunity to kind of tie the whole story together, at least from my experience.
Yeah, well, we've had the opportunity to have a lot of private conversations over the years. And so there's just been so many really fun things you've taught me. And let's talk about what do we think the future is for accounting firms. So let's start it at the beginning. You had your own practice. You were a working CPA. What made you walk away and think about working at Bench? Is that right?
Yeah, so I actually was the staff accountant at the city of Laramie, Wyoming when I graduated from college. And it was a place where I literally had to take a piece of paper, handwrite a journal entry, rubber stamp the date on it, get my manager to sign off on it, add it to the DOS accounting system. I don't even know what the accounting system was. Stack it on the other pieces of paper that I then took down to the basement for the auditor review every year. And, that was in 2011. As a high schooler...
2011. That's not even that long ago.
It's not even that long ago. And
the internet was definitely invented by then.
There was cloud systems for sure. And for some reason, accounting innovates slowly, governments innovate slowly. And, I was in middle school, high school, running my own business and using Visual Basic recorders in Excel. So I was already doing this like vibe coding in Excel in high school. So the thought of handwriting a journal entry made me want to die, and it made them realize I was not a good fit very quickly. So I, basically screwed up my first job out of college. And so I said, screw it. I'm just going to move to New York. So I moved to New York with a credit card and a dream on a Wednesday. And I had interviewed with this thing called a tech startup company. I didn't even know what a tech startup company was, in this incubator called Techstars in the old office that was where Foursquare was, which is like, I don't know. I think they're still around. It's kind of like...
It was definitely like a hot company in New York. I remember having the app when smartphones were just coming out and being like, I'm going to be the mayor of the 42nd floor of my Long Island City building, looking out over New York. It was definitely like the hot startup, like mobile company at the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, boy from Wyoming with a fresh accounting degree and a fresh failure shows up to his interview in like this button-up shirt. And I went home to get on a sports coat so I could interview with Ian Crosby. I walk in, there's a ping pong table. People are dressed like Slavs. It's like sweatshirts and T-shirts and jeans. And, like David Tisch and Brad Feld showing up eventually, walking around with baseball caps on backwards. And I was like, where am I? And I thought I was applying for a bookkeeping job. So I did not get into tech on purpose at all. I literally moved to New York on a Wednesday, had to pay rent the next month, and I got the job offer. I think it was like $17 or $18 an hour, and I said I'll do it for 19. Over happy hour when I got the email on the Friday, and my first Friday in New York, and they said, "Okay, you're hired. Can you start on Monday?" I said, "No, I'm moving into my permanent place, so I had to start on a Tuesday." So I accidentally became the first bookkeeper, which was really like a bookkeeping intern, as posted on a Craigslist ad while I was in Wyoming applying for jobs in New York, claiming that I lived there.
That is amazing. And I think we're going to go probably tease into the punchline of sometimes making more money is asking for more money and knowing what you're worth. And so we'll see how that ties in to what you're doing today. All right. So you're yeehawing all the way from one of my favorite states of Wyoming to the big city. You respond to this Craigslist ad. You meet the one and only Ian, who's starting Bench. What was the pitch or vision of Bench back then?
Yeah, it's the same thing I think we're all still trying to do, which is automate accounting. That was the initial pitch. And it was originally called 10Sheet, 10SHEET, which that name had to be changed very quickly for obvious reasons. It's very difficult to get an email address correct when you have to spell or say numbers. So Ian was trying to automate accounting, what we're all still trying to do. And it was innovative, smart, amazing. I mostly just did it because it was an accounting job that mostly paid my rent. And then I realized that, wait, I get to work with a founder who's a marketing guy who had worked at RIM, which was, a darling of Canada and the world. And then I got to work with a product person and an engineer person. And so I accidentally kind of became a PM, accountant, salesperson, marketer, just by being able to sit in the Techstars office for a year. Well, in New York for a year before moving to Vancouver.
That is right. What a wild shift and change in job responsibilities. All right. So automate accounting. I guess like one question that comes up, I think in my mind as a non-accountant, but somebody who spends a lot of time with accountants, I see the background of what your first job was and how it influenced your desire to want to automate accounting. What in your mind is the tension between I'm an accountant and I'm trying to automate accounting?
I think I honestly go back to the invention of a tractor, right? Like there were probably farmers who were very angry that they didn't get to use their horse and their plow anymore. But then it also opened up the ability to do industrialized farming, for better or for worse. And so there has been innovation in accounting for certainly over the last 100 years, significantly, and it's increasingly increasing the velocity. But I mean, if you don't want to innovate, you will not have a job. Fortunately for accountants, I think we'll probably be some of the last people who can still do stuff by paper. I still have old clients reach out to me who told them that their accountant sent them a paper organizer. Like my consulting business, which I'm getting ahead of myself, I was going to jokingly post on LinkedIn that I help firms go paperless because that was a really nouveau thing to say 10, 15 years ago. There are still paper-full firms.
This is like resistance is strong. All right, let's get over the I needed to pay rent and I'm in New York City. In New York City, it costs $20 to just take a breath every morning before it's just money leaves your wallet faster. So I totally get that need. There's the desire now to automate accounting. I want to automate it as much as we can along the way. When you then started and you started working there, Bench was, I think, kind of like one of the first to really lean in hard to this model. It sounds really simple, but it turns out it's still hard because we've been talking about this at least for 15 years, if not longer. What do you think worked really well inside? Let's start there.
Marketing and product was amazing, in part because of the time period, which I think you even experience, is like the heyday of Facebook ads, and when you could really dial in the algorithm and pay, and it was a real cash machine. So I think a lot of really smart marketing. It was also, we just modernized it, which you go to, even today, any accountant's website, it looks like you're in the 80s or 90s. And so if you have a website that all of a sudden it looks like you're even contemporary, you're ahead of the game. And then you return calls. That's like a huge thing. So you're already bolting on a true sales function, even before we had a real sales team. So that was like Ian and then me and then Lindsay, another friend bookkeeper, who's now a friend. The other things I think Bench did really well was, the idea of subscription-based billing, catch-up billing for historical scoped work. Like later on, we really applied a lot of the industrial revolutions, like specialization of roles where you had a data processor, catch up, keep up, different roles and teams. But there was also the idea of a subscription-based billing model and the idea of like a Main Street Wyoming business being able to hire a bookkeeper for a relatively affordable price, which is fine, but comes with lots of challenges because those very small businesses, they need a lot of handholding and education around even, what is the difference between a bookkeeper and a tax accountant? So as easy as it is to get the volume, it's also harder volume to service in some ways.
Yeah. So you were there. Do you remember about how many customers did it have its first customer yet?
No, Ian and I rode the subway to a hand clinic doctor's office that he got some tip from someone who needed a bookkeeper. So I literally go with Ian. I'm like 22, take the subway up to, Midtown, I think, go into this clinic where there's like 80-year-old woman is passing off her practice to some 40-year-old woman. And he pitches her and sells her. And that's how I learned how to do sales first, really, was watching Ian sell his software in person via the subway in New York. And then that was one of our first clients. I think that was the first client. There's one other that's kind of coming to mind. It was like a marketing agency. But yeah, 0 clients when I started, paying clients. And then by the time I left, I think there were about 3,000.
And was the pitch, I guess, to you as an employee and to the customer that you would be the bookkeeping firm for them? You would do the actual bookkeeping and maybe tax work?
No tax at that point. We tried and failed, and then they tried and failed a couple more times on tax. But the pitch, I do think we were really leveraging, we're really cheap because we're going to automate all your bookkeeping. But things that they did well, no payables or receivables, so it's cash only. Also I still don't think has the idea of a vendor in the system. So it's very, it's
very simple.
Very simple. And that's how we were able to get to market so fast.
And, I think fast forward, my perception of Bench, as I started getting in the industry, was like one of the largest, if not maybe the largest bookkeeping firms in the United States. And I think my perception, correct me if I'm wrong, was you guys Bench offered at a price point that attracted, I think, around the 50% of the small business world that was like, I can't afford or I don't value $1,000 to $2,500 a month for like a full practice. And that the promise of efficiency through scale was an attractive value prop. And so is my perception, we never really talked about this, I guess I'm just throwing it on the spot. Was that perception sort of the wedge into the market? Is that what you think?
I think so. I mean, Gateway ran an ad in my hometown advertising fiber optic cable internet going through the most rural state, if you don't count Alaska, I guess, in the union. And the fact that these ranchers and farmers could send an email, and so I think all of a sudden we're now applying accounting, technology, bookkeeping that ordinarily most small Main Street USA businesses probably would just forego. And then the poor tax accountant gets literally a shoebox. And then they kind of make sense of it. Hopefully they don't get audited because there's going to be really hard to prove that it was right. So yeah, it was, like cable television is to the invention of those networks. We're bringing things to the people. And I think that we served a lot of people who otherwise just wouldn't have been.
Hey, we'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
All right. One of my favorite tools that I use and we use is Notion. Notion is used by thousands of startups around the world as their connected workspace for everything from engineering specs to new hire onboarding to fundraising.
Notion has a special offer for listeners. 6 months of free Notion with unlimited AI, value of over $6,000. So you can access the limitless power of AI right inside of Notion to build and scale your company and team with one tool. Get 6 months free of Notion with unlimited AI, along with custom templates when you apply for notion.com/startups/puzzle. Once again, that's notion.com/startups/puzzle. Go for it. There's a shift happening today in accounting. Startups aren't just building products faster, they're rethinking how they run their business too. Accounting shouldn't be stuck in the past. Puzzle is leading a new movement with an AI-first ledger built for speed, automation, and real-time decision-making. No more waiting for month end, no more manual reconciliations, just financials that keep up with you. The future of accounting isn't spreadsheets, it's AI-driven, intuitive, and built for the next generation of companies. Join the movement today at puzzle.io and take control of your future.
And so if we look, I know it happened after you left, which we'll get back to, but Bench's story, when it looked in the headlines and raised over 100 million of venture capital and 35,000. Ultimately, there's a sad story where Bench didn't end up working out, and it was acquired and revived, I think, under the brand Main Street, which is quite exciting. Ian wrote a post about sort of the change of leadership from founder-led to professional-led. I think it was after your time, so you don't need to sort of hypothesize on that. But was there anything on the inside as you went in, as the first paying client, as the bookkeeper? Where do you think it worked well, and where did you start to potentially see cracks in the vision of automating accounting?
I mean, the reality was, I don't think we ever got even close to the vision, at least when I was there, and so there's 7 years plus of history after me, but I also remain in tune with some of what was going on. The problem is, I think the beauty of being so simple and getting to market so quickly is, once you've taken on venture capital and have revenue, you now have revenue goals, which are in competition to product goals. And there we had a hack code. You said something about Bench being the largest bookkeeping firm in the USA, which is perfect. And that's what they want you to believe, what we wanted you to believe, because we were in Canada, North America, largest bookkeeping firm in North America. And guess what? Especially right now, everything is 30% off here. Plus salaries are even 20 or 30%. We found labor arbitrage is what really ended up happening. Was it innovative? Was it beautiful? Did we do a lot of good work? Yes. But I think it's like a steady paycheck. It's too easy to give up. And so why would we invest in automating something when our margins are actually pretty good?
If you looked back, what advice would you give to Luke on that kind of day one? Assuming you had to stay a bunch.
Oh, man. I live my life very much in a way of zero regrets. So I don't think I would want to change anything that I did. But I think the question you're asking is like, what probably did I learn the most from that experience is, I think I took things very personally, and I think especially when you're in your first job out of college, and if anyone's listening to this who's like at an early stage startup and you're in person, it feels like family. And I think there's a lot of good that comes from a family styled company, but there's also a lot of dysfunction. So I think the biggest lesson I probably learned, not necessarily directly, but it's a business. It needs to be profitable, and there's goals, and we all need to make sure that we're pulling our weight.
And then from Bench, is that when you left to go start your own practice?
Yeah. So the first time Bench attempted to automate tax, like bring in tax, because of the market segment, and really true of any business owner, they don't want to do any accounting, and they especially don't want to talk to a different bookkeeper than tax accountant. So the hypothesis was, if we add tax, we're going to do really well. Well, from a sales point of view, overwhelming success. Sold a 10. And, that's actually when I officially became a CPA, because I'd passed all my exams. I just never worked for a CPA. So we hired a person who's still a very good friend and a partner at a Big Four firm whose specialty is in international U.S. tax, U.S. CPA. And that was the first time I worked under a CPA. The long story not as long with that is we hired a bunch of Canadians, which you can train on US bookkeeping because it's actually simpler than Canadian bookkeeping. But to hire a bunch of young, early career people to learn tax is kind of a blind leading the blind, with the exception of my business partner and the friend that I mentioned. And so what that means is it was a colossal train wreck when it came to operations. Like, we were serving every industry in every state, in every township, in every county. And, it just became horrible. And the part of the problem is, and one of the messages we'll get to on my consulting work too, is you do indicate your value and people respect you based on your price in some ways. And we were charging very little. And so that's usually about how much respect we got, except when I answered the phone and they were like, "You're the guy on the website?" And then they would be nice to me, but it was hard. And so from there, they decided to shut down the tax practice and refund a bunch of money to all these people who were expecting to get their tax work done. So they wound that down. And the most experienced person on the team had come from New York. I didn't know her then when I lived in New York. This is like, 7 years later after I lived in New York. She got recruited to work for Bench in Vancouver. And she was the most experienced, hardest working, smartest person. And so she and I saw everything happen and we're like, we can do this again. All we have to do, just do it again for ourselves and put on like, we're only going to serve this type of entity. We're only going to serve these states and make sure that we're operating in our zone of expertise as opposed to a big broad net, which, like I said, from a sales point of view was a tremendous success, but operationally didn't go so well at Bench.
Yeah. And so from there, you started your own practice, a little bit of Simplified, and then your second venture into a tech-enabled accounting services business at Pilot. What was similar? What was different?
Yeah. I mean, I'll spend 30 seconds on my own practice to explain. Like, I chose, and it's part of a lot of my philosophy now, is even with Claude Code, I think using technology that technologists are building is going to help you more than trying to become a technologist. So that was my motto. I, used HubSpot, I used Xero, I used Ignition in my practice to automate my practice as much as possible. And so I considered myself to be tech enabled and I had no interest in building software. But then, it was time to go on to other things, and Pilot had just become a unicorn. And I was eyeing Pilot even when I was at Bench. So that would have been 5 years previous, at least. And it was compelling because they were charging like 10x, right? So I think the ACV at Bench would have been like $3,600, maybe even less. Where the ACV at Pilot, when I was selling there, I think my minimum would have been 12 grand, minimum, And the challenging thing, or the good learning for any accountants out there, the $36,000 client actually appreciates you maybe even more than the $1,200 client, because they understand why you're important. They have a budget, and it's not, do I need accounting? It's like, how can I find a good accountant? So sales was actually easier on the bigger ticket item of accrual accounting and CFO and tax work at Pilot than it was at my own practice and at Bench.
Right. The people who are willing to pay more will value it more, which feels sometimes counterintuitive when you're trying to probably name a price as an accountant and you have a new lead and you don't want to lose a lead. You don't want to lose a potential client. So probably another good lesson as you shift over to your consulting we'll come back to later. Without getting into anything that you can't share, what did you learn at Pilot maybe that you saw differently and like more exciting that convinced you to, one, join there, and then two, sort of see them as they grew?
Yeah, the huge contrast, right, is Bench, we built our own GL. And then my own practice, I used Xero, which was like a novel GL at the time, and still sort of is. Pilot decided, rather than reinvent the wheel, let's build something on top of it. So there's advantages to that.
Yeah, I hear challenges with the API every once in a while. I guess as we think about the forming Luke's thesis on technology and automation of accounting over time, I think this is a good time to, like, from Bench now to Pilot, What was your continued thesis, and did anything change after the time at Pilot?
I think my biggest thesis and what I hope to spread the word about mostly is the balance between sales and operations. And, technology can help with both sides of that. There's CRMs on the sales side, as well as other lots of marketing automation tools. And then there's bolt-on tools, whether you built them yourself, like Pilot, or whether you bought them, or whether you created the GL to execute on the operations. Harmonizing those two is so critical. Like, I made a lot of money at Pilot, and I know that operations was struggling a little bit. And that was challenging to not be able to have a little bit more harmony. The same thing was true with me and my business partner. I would make a bunch of sales. She would be the one having to do the tax work with contractors, and that created tension. So how do you maintain a healthy tension? Because the other thing is, I have clients right now, we're recording this like right in the heart of tax season. I have clients right now who basically have asked me to pump the brakes for them, because I have asked them, how many more clients do you want this tax season? But they're up against a deadline. If you want to grow a tax practice and you haven't staffed and forecast to be able to take on clients during the busiest, most urgent time, you're doing it wrong.
It's I guess there's always a challenge in sort of sales and services, because the bottleneck is human capital and the time that you have. And if you're already busy, this stuff, like, I think about this all the time. I'm so busy. The solution is to hire somebody. I'm too busy to interview somebody to hire somebody to do it. And I can't, we're still at least theoretically biological beings, and we're constrained by the amount of coffee we can drink in any one given day. All right. So now we have this kind of pattern emerging to get to a place where we're consulting to help accounting firms become more profitable. And we get this. You were the bookkeeper, you were the tax person, you were the salesperson. Let's talk about this next phase and the idea of scaling the accountant with Rivet. What made you think about that as another step in your career? And again, back to the point of, what did you see inside there that was different and better? And how did that evolve your thesis as you got to thinking about what the future of accounting firms mean?
Well, of course, we can't skip Puzzle. We went Pilot, Puzzle, Rivet. So the reason I chose to work at Puzzle is because it was a real software play, right? And so the three companies I worked at before that were all dependent on humans to do the stuff. And there was, certainly some software being built and that sort of thing. But I was excited about the idea that we can really not just be dependent on human labor. And I think that's something that you've continued to do really well, is rather than try to hire internally people to do the human in the loop, you're keeping the accountants in the loop at Puzzle. And so that's something that wasn't the case in the two previous venture-backed bookkeeping accounting companies I worked at. So that was a lot of fun to be able to kind of go back to bench days in many ways, where I got to talk to product people and engineer people and, how should this work and all of that. And so after a few years, it was fun to go back to more of a real service-oriented business and flex more tax-focused knowledge at Rivet. So the types of clients that, Nick and Kyle and the team had already landed was pretty amazing. And the amount that especially Nick was able to learn in such a short period of time after not having been an accountant, he's just a very smart guy. And so he got up to speed on what the problems really are for the ICP of mostly venture-backed, larger Series A, B type startups, and the foreign shareholders and the 83Bs, and the foreign 1116s and other forms. I don't even remember or know, because I never really had to deal with it. So it was very fun to go back to being a technical tax person in sales. The same problems remain. So building great technology, building a way to manage their client work and so on. Unfortunately, no one has yet built a replacement. I think there's one person trying to do it for some of the actual tax software. Current tax software still looks like DOS. it is even more archaic than any of the general ledger software, but it's just such a huge barrier to entry.
Yeah, I do. I have to say, I personally use Rivet, as you know. And the thing that I really liked, aside from the Nick is just an incredibly smart person, Kyle's an incredibly smart person, and they're so complementary that they can attack a problem in a different way with marketing and growth and first principle problem solving. You know from talking to Nick how smart he is, and you know the trust that you have in Kyle, given his background, is like they were very transparent with who they were. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of the challenges in venture-backed accounting software is people don't know who they are really. And one of the things that I think become challenging is if you have a disdain for services businesses as a tech company, it shows. And Nick really leaned into like, we are here, like, I am a human and I'm here to solve your problem. And we're going to use technology to make our relationship better. And I have to say, in a very short period of time, after using lots of big firms along the way, the simplicity of the UX and the modern of the UX, just the interface of how we act is just so much more pleasant than, I shouldn't name names, like the software that I've used at other big name firms. And you're like, oh, this is just overwhelming. It's just like, it's so simple and it's sort of like a modern experience, but they're very personal. They've really mastered this feeling of personal touch with a very software approach. I think that's good.
Yeah.
So we're at a new stage in technology. And so I have a slight insight into this, building a general ledger. And the way that I'm thinking about it now in 2026 with the ability for AI models to now do agentic workflows is, there's a certain amount that you can automate. And I'll use it directionally as a framework. Don't hold me to these numbers at all, but like 50% of core accounting can be automated with APIs, just the work. And I think that having these modern players like Ramp, where Nick worked, and Brex and Row and Mercury and Gusto and Rippling and Deal and all these sort of modern players really investing in API allows you to just ingest the data in like a really clean, reliable way, which I think is really great, including like sometimes statements and memos and all this extra information so that when a bookkeeper comes in, they have the context they need to make the decision that they need. Because before AI and really machine learning, sometimes the best we had was an if-then statement. And it turns out that if-then statement gets you a pretty decent amount of the way. Then the next pays, let's say 35%, you can do with machine learning. You can get 85%. Categorization gets pretty good. You can draft reconciliations pretty well. You can handle anomalies pretty well, but software design and ML can get you maybe around 85% of the way. And as we all know, accounting is binary. It's an all or nothing value prop. If you can't get that long tail, does it really matter? Like, you're incrementally better, but who cares? And what I'm seeing now is the potential for deterministic AI, meaning it's not like a LLM saying, I think this is the answer and I'm generating something. But if you're a trained expert, like an accountant, and you know what it is you want to do, you can explain that in precise terms and AI can go do that thing. And so the other maybe way to think about it is probably about 50% of every single company's accounting is the same. I got to do reconciliations. I got to like clear, categorize, like I got to look at bills and invoices. And then maybe 25% is like specific and unique to an industry. There's some similarities between e-commerce companies and farming companies and manufacturing companies and real estate companies. And then there's a 25% that's like unique to that one specific company. How they want to do depreciation. Do they want to do accruals? Do they not want to do accruals? How do they want to handle stuff? When are their payment terms? Whatever the sort of nuances are. And that has always been the long pole of long work, I think. Now, there's always going to be edge cases, like somebody withdraws cash from the bank account, doesn't do anything. Somebody has an invoice and there's no contract. Like, the stuff is still always going to need an accountant. But the way that we're thinking about it now is, I think I have a view of what the future of the role of accountants and accounting firms will be. But so do you. And you've started a practice based upon this. So of all of you've learned between working at tech-enabled services firms, service firms with some tech-enable, core software, having your own firm and practice, what made you decide that right now is the time to start a consulting practice for firms, and why?
My vision of technology and AI is it's going to allow us to be more human than ever. I happen to be very good at accounting. I hate doing accounting. So my LinkedIn bio has read for probably 5 to 10 years. The computers are coming and I can't wait. Like I am thrilled. I have spoken to multiple people about softwares that exist that can automatically do a bank reconciliation. It can also pull the PDF. It could log in using your password to the bank, pull the PDF, do the exception analysis, add the transaction, reconcile it, done. And I just got off with somebody who was telling me a story of someone who's running $1 million bookkeeping firm and fired all of his staff already.
Whoa.
Because of the capabilities that are already out there to do this. What does that do? That gives us the ability to then have a conversation, make decisions, work together in a different way. I don't see this as a zero-sum game in any way. It's overwhelming and scary. I will give you that. And you can certainly be a doomsayer about all this, but whether you're pessimistic or optimistic about it, it's here. So you may as well try and work with it. And the most encouraging thing, I'm stealing from somebody that I'm blanking on his name. I saw my LinkedIn, but he said, I'm not as worried about knowing everything about AI and accounting. I just know I would need to know a little bit more than the person behind me. So it's the bear. Just outrun your friend, not the bear. And that's maybe a little morbid and sad, but I think that we've survived a lot of technical innovation, and humans, fire, wheels, the ledger. Let's make the ledger contemporary. Let's do better things with our time than bank reconciliation, receipt matching, and accruals.
Yeah. So if I hear that story, I think two questions come top of mind. One, if you're on the receiving end of that $1 million firm practice and they just fired everybody, what do you recommend to that person to do? And then separately, when a firm comes to you and says, I know I need to adopt AI, where do I start?
Yeah.
How do you answer those two questions?
Yeah, I will say the hardest one is going to be to the bookkeeper who just got put out of a job. There's going to be some very uncomfortable labor reallocation. I'm sure there's a more correct term for it. I totally get that. And, Bill Gates was right about universal basic income 20 years ago or more when he was talking about that. I think that's probably where we need to get. So hopefully we have enough benevolent billionaires that will be the case. Notwithstanding, people come to me thinking they need to be embracing AI. They're not even doing some of the core basic fundamentals of having a CRM, running a sales process, having a dedicated salesperson that's not responsible for executing on tax work because they're going to have a conflict of interest that's too hard to internalize unless you're a super special person. You should be recording your calls. I think we're all used to that now. We used to be really afraid of recording calls. Record your calls in order to leverage marketing content, standardize your SOPs, create SOWs, identify out of scope work and charge for it. And you mentioned something about discounting before. If you're an accountant running a firm, don't discount. Don't discount. You do not have to discount. So these firms that want to use AI, there are a handful I've spoken to, and I think, using call transcripts is the most powerful one because of the large language model. And I think only now am I being convinced, in part from like a recent demo of Puzzle, as well as some other cloud code rumors that I've confirmed, on it being able to act as an agent to actually go do the thing. Someone still has to sign off on it being correct, right? So I think if anything, it should help you think about how you can scale your practice without having to hire 100 people in the Philippines or India. And, I personally have ethical, moral questions about that. How can we actually equalize things better for the rest of the world in a way that doesn't require this bizarre economic arrangement?
When a firm comes to you, like they raise their hand and they reach out. All right, Luke, I need help. I want to make more money. Where do they start? Where do you start?
I always start with a vision, and that's purely from Jim Collins. If you haven't read Good to Great, stop everything, stop listening to me, go read Good to Great, get the audiobook. It's probably the most important book I think anyone should ever read if they're doing business. And you start with your vision. What do you want for the world? I got off a call with a woman this morning who's running a practice. She's like, I'm not sure if my vision is correct. And I said, stop. This is your vision. I've seen several ways to run an accounting practice. It's going to continue to change and be very different. And I don't know what that will always look like, but you have a vision for the world and how you want to show up for your clients and your employees and your spouse, and the way you hire and build and buy software, and your values that inform that vision are the most important things. Get really crystal on that. And then what do you want to do in 3 years? Okay, you're making $0 now. You want to be able to quit your job? Easy, within 3 years, no problem. And you'll make 150 minimum. You want to scale from a $10 million practice to a $20 million practice? Okay, that's probably going to be a little bit more work, but we can do it in 3 years for sure. Probably getting rid of the lower 10% and continuing to focus on your ICP, making sure you're charging what you're worth, making sure you're, getting paid up front for things. So once you have the vision that's informed by the values, you break it down into a 90-day plan. And then we just have a weekly call. Let's just check in. How's it going?
Do you see more accountants wanting to make more money or spend less time doing the work?
But yeah, it's both. I mean, certainly because of the way I position myself, I think most people want to make more money, right? But one of my big tenets is, it doesn't matter if you make $1 million if you spent $1.1 million to do it. You lost $1, and you stressed yourself out, and now you probably took on debt to do it. So making more money is great, but that's why your values and your vision for the world and how you want your company to contribute to making the world a better place is so important. So there are people I work with lifestyle firms who, work 20, 30 hours a week. That's wealth. If they're making a living wage and they're working 20 or 30 hours a week, that's wealth. But for somebody else who is a big hurdle, here's another book pitch, The E-Myth. I think everyone should read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. Usually a bookkeeper or tax accountant hates their boss because, of course, all bosses are bad, except you, of course. And you think you're smarter than them, even though you have different information. And so what happens is you start your own thing, and then you realize, oh, shit, this is actually a lot harder than I thought to work on the business and work in the business. And so what I see a lot of people struggling with is, how do I get out of the weeds and see the big picture of the business? And those are the people who want to work less in the technical accounting and maybe work less, but they definitely want to make more money and, provide. I usually get to a point where I can ask somebody, how much money does somebody need to write you a check for today for you to be happy? And then that's one way we back into their maybe 10-year or 3-year vision.
I think it's great advice. Sometimes the simplest things. All right. Last question. I want you to be honest. 5 years from now, what do you think a successful firm looks like with all that you know about technology and whatever your little secretive comment was about some rumored stuff about Claude that you've seen with your own eyes?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a lot more automated, but it also doesn't matter how fast you automate the wrong thing. So we're probably going to be more like lifeguards, making sure that no one's drowning for AI slop and, all these reasoning models going off. And so accountants will probably be more like the auditor. Like the auditor is sort of the pinnacle, which I could never really hack it as, I did a summarize of I'm reviewing everything. So most accounting work will probably move more towards purely auditing. And so at this point, you're probably going to be auditing systems and processes as much or more than the actual numbers.
I love that. I was on a call with a firm this morning, and I was showing them some of the future of what I think accounting will be and some alpha stuff that we're working on. I was like, does this scare you or get you excited? And they said, it gets me really excited because it makes me feel like I'm going to be an architect in the future. I get to architect the system, but the system just kind of does it. And so as I am sitting here in downtown San Francisco, in the middle of downtown, looking up these tall buildings, the thought of being the architect and getting to build one of these things feels really cool. And inside of all these windows I'm looking at are lots and lots of up and coming, hopeful businesses. And to get to be the architect of their financial health feels really, really rewarding, much more so than I have to log into a bank account, download the statement, upload it, type in a prompt, make sure that the prompt is right, match it to the GL, just to be able to get to do the work to tell somebody your business is doing well or your business isn't doing well. And let's figure out how to make it better.
100%.
All right, Luke, that was great. How can people find you? Where should they go?
My website is lukefrye.co. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Luke Frye, LukeFrye. And I'm always happy to have a conversation, whether you think you have an interesting idea about accounting innovation, wine, motorcycles, or anything along those lines.
Awesome. All right, Luke Frye, LukeFrye.co. Is that right?
That's right.
And also go follow Luke on LinkedIn. Lots of great content there as well. All right, Luke, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Sasha.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Tech Finance with Puzzle and Turpentine. If you got value from this episode, please share it with anybody building or funding the future of technology. And please leave us a review wherever you're listening and tell me about what you want to hear more of. If you're looking for accounting software you'll actually love to power your company, check out Puzzle.io, the modern accounting platform for the AI era. Tech Finance is part of Turpentine, the awesome podcast network behind Econ 102 with Noah Smith, Turpentine VC, Complex Systems with Patrick McKenzie, and so many more.